If you believe that love can tear down the tallest wall of arrogance, hit that like button right now. Your support is crucial. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the continuation of this moving story. The Architect of Loneliness. A man worth billions, Ethan Vance, the cold, brilliant architect behind Vance Global, believed he had designed the perfect life. Sterile, controlled, and utterly devoid of unpredictable emotions. But his perfectly structured world didn't just crack. It was utterly obliterated when a quiet, beautiful journalist introduced 3 tiny, identical blue-eyed intruders into his life. He denied them. He denied their mother. He drove away, convinced he'd made the logical choice. He was wrong. And 2 years later, a sight on a quiet New England beach would bring his ruthless empire to its knees. Part 1. The Architect of Solitude. Ethan Vance had always operated under the belief that emotion was a vulnerability, a weakness for men destined to rule. At 34 years old, his life was measured in metrics and victories, not sentiment. He had built Vance Global Architects from nothing, commanded respect in every boardroom in Manhattan, and held a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and untouchable. Everything was planned. His mornings began with strategy meetings. His nights ended with scotch and silence. Nothing and no one could compromise the steel and glass empire he had built. At least that's what he thought. Before Audrey Aranda. Audrey walked into his world silently, without calculation or ambition. She was a journalist covering self-made industry leaders, and Ethan had agreed to the interview only for the public relations boost. She was unlike the people he dealt with on Park Avenue. She didn't care about his money or his influence, and this equally irritated and intrigued him. When she challenged his answers, laughed at his arrogance, and spoke of dreams instead of profit margins, something unfamiliar stirred inside him. For the first time in years, someone saw him as a person, not a symbol. What began as a formal interview stretched into long conversations, dinners that bled into nights together. And soon, Audrey became the single, beautiful anomaly in a life built on absolute control. The verdict: this is not ours. But when Audrey told him she was pregnant, that fragile balance shattered completely. The penthouse office went silent. He looked at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. His first thought was, this cannot be happening to me. He had been so careful, so disciplined. Fatherhood was not in the blueprint. Audrey waited for him to say anything, but all she saw was raw panic and a flash of rage behind his composed exterior. This isn't the time, he finally said, his tone sharp enough to cut through her trembling hope. She reached for his hand, her voice cracking as she whispered, "It's not about the timing, Ethan. It's about us." But he pulled away. "Us," he repeated bitterly. "There is no us. You knew who I was when you walked into my life. I am not built for this. I don't want this." That night was the last time she saw him. He left her standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face as he walked out without looking back. He told himself it was the logical choice. He couldn't risk his career, his focus, or his carefully curated image for something as unpredictable as parenthood. He convinced himself she would move on, that she would realize he was right, that she would one day thank him for not dragging her into his world. But as the elevator doors closed, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls and saw something he didn't recognize. Fear. The miracle by the sea and the triplets. Meanwhile, Audrey faced the slow collapse of her world alone. She moved out of her tiny city apartment and found a quiet spot near the rugged coastline of Maine, far from the constant noise of her memories. The pregnancy was difficult, not just physically, but emotionally. She wanted to hate him, but couldn't. Every time she felt a kick, She remembered his rare, unguarded smile. When the doctor told her she was expecting triplets, she laughed through her tears. She felt like life was giving her back everything he had taken, multiplied by 3. Months later, when she held her daughters for the first time, all the fear and loneliness vanished. 3 tiny faces, all with the same curly brown hair and piercing blue eyes, stared up at her as if they already knew her heart. They were identical, miraculous, and perfect. Audrey named them Liv, Grace, and June, and in that moment, she made a promise. Though the man who should have been their father wanted nothing to do with them, she would give them the kind of love that could never be replaced by wealth or power. She whispered softly into the night, "You will never know what you lost." And as the waves gently crashed outside, the sound mingled with the soft breaths of her daughters, and for the first time since he left, she smiled. She was no longer broken. She had something he would never have. Love that asked for nothing and gave everything. Pause and ponder. Do you think Ethan's fear of losing control was a reflection of his true weakness? Or was he simply a person who never learned how to love? Give us your honest opinion in the comments. The vacuum of victory. 2 years passed since Ethan walked out of Audrey's life. His success only grew, though the cost became heavier than he would ever admit. Vance Global thrived across 3 continents. The world saw him as a man who had it all. But the truth was, every victory tasted flatter than the last. He had the penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline, the cars, the respect, but nothing felt real. At night, when the offices emptied and the silence crept in, he wondered why he felt nothing at all. One night, after a grueling meeting, he found himself walking through the city with no real destination. He passed a playground, and from a distance came the sound of children laughing. He stopped, watching. Something inside him twisted painfully, a deep ache that had no name. He quickly turned and walked until the sound was gone. Part 2. The sand, the sea, and the triple shock. The following spring brought a restlessness Ethan couldn't explain. Work no longer distracted him. His nights became sleepless, filled with unnamed thoughts. He told himself it was just burnout, and he needed a change of scenery. When a business partner invited him to a coastal conference in Maine, he accepted without hesitation. It was a short trip, 3 days by the ocean, away from the flashing city lights. He didn't know this trip would change everything. The morning he arrived, the air smelled different, cleaner, softer, touched by the sea. The town was quiet, lined with small cafes. He walked the pier after his meeting ended. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about numbers or power. He just watched the horizon. It was then that the sound of laughter stopped him cold. It wasn't ordinary laughter. It was high-pitched, sweet, and it doubled, then tripled, a chorus of giggles that drifted up from the sand. He looked down the beach and saw a woman kneeling, her long blonde hair catching the sunlight as she helped 3 small girls build a sandcastle. They were tiny, identical, each with light brown curls that shone golden in the sun, and eyes so blue they seemed to hold the sky within them. Something inside him froze. He stood there, unable to move, as the girls turned to look up at him. It was only for a moment, but it felt like an eternity. Their eyes, those eyes, were his. The same deep blue, the same shape, the same spark he saw in the mirror every morning. His throat went dry. The woman looked up then, and his breath hitched. Audrey. Time seemed to slow around them. She hadn't changed much, though she looked different in ways that hurt to notice. Thinner, perhaps, with exhaustion, but there was a strength in the way she held herself. Their eyes met, and the world went silent. There was no rage, no tears, just a long, heavy quiet, filled with everything neither of them had said for 2 years. She didn't speak. She simply turned, took the girl's hands, and walked away. He stayed there long after they had disappeared from sight, his pulse hammering. The sound of their laughter still echoed in his ears like a haunting melody. He couldn't breathe properly. He couldn't think. He had spent 2 years convincing himself he'd made the right choice. Now, suddenly, that delusion was shattered. For the first time in his life, Ethan Vance, the man who prided himself on having no regrets, felt an emptiness of regret that consumed him entirely. Call to action. If you believe fate is giving Ethan a chance at redemption, comment below, using the hashtag #secondchance, and share this video with a friend. Part 3. The Return Without a Shield. Days after returning to the city, Ethan found that everything around him had lost its form. The skyscrapers he once admired seemed soulless. He couldn't focus on work. At night, he returned to a crushing silence. One night, driving home on the empty streets, he made a sudden decision. He turned the car around and headed for the highway. The city lights faded behind him, and by dawn, he was driving down the same coastal road in Maine. He wandered aimlessly for hours until he saw her again. Audrey was standing in front of a small grocery store, holding a paper bag while balancing one of the girls on her hip. The other two stood beside her, each clutching a tiny seashell. They looked happy, untouched by the world that had once broken him. When she finally noticed him, their eyes met again, and she froze. The shock in her expression lasted only a second before it hardened into quiet resolution. She didn't look angry. She looked tired, like someone who had already lived through every emotion and had nothing left to give. She turned and began walking toward home. The girls followed, giggling, unaware of the tension in the air. Ethan stood there, unable to speak. That night, he checked into a cheap motel near the water. He thought about the kind of life she must have built without him. He remembered how certain he had been when he told her he didn't want to be a father. Now, that certainty felt obscene. The silent beginning of humility. The next morning, he found himself near the park, watching from a distance as the girls played. They ran barefoot across the grass while Audrey read a book on a bench. Her smile, though faint, was real. It hit him harder than anything else, the way she could still smile after everything he had done. He wanted to approach, to apologize, but the words he rehearsed in his mind sounded hollow compared to the life she had built without him. Weeks later, he left his phone on his kitchen counter in Manhattan and drove back again. He went directly to the bakery where he remembered seeing Audrey. He asked about her. They told him she lived near the cliffs. There, nestled among the wildflowers, was a small white cottage with a blue door. He stood for a long time, feeling like an intruder in a life that had learned to exist without him. Then, one of the girls ran out. When she saw him, she stood still, studying him. The girl tilted her head, then smiled, a small, hesitant smile that utterly dismantled him. Audrey appeared in the doorway, and her expression changed completely. She didn't say a word. The silence between them was heavier than the wind. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse. "Audrey," he said quietly, "I didn't come here to make excuses. I saw the girls. I know. I can't change what I did, but I can't pretend I didn't see what I saw." When she finally spoke, her tone was quiet, but laced with years of pain. "What do you want, Ethan?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe just to see them. To see you." Her eyes hardened again. "You've seen enough," she said softly, and she turned back toward the door. But before going in, she added, "They don't know who you are. Don't confuse them." Then she closed the door, and he was left standing in the wind, staring at the blue paint that separated him from everything he had ever wanted. Part 4. The Long Penance. That night, he sat in his car near the cliffs until the stars came out. He realized what he had run from all those years was not responsibility. It was love, something he hadn't known how to hold. For the first time in his life, he wanted nothing more than to earn back what he had thrown away. He knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't leave this time. The next morning, he didn't go. In the small town, he stopped at the local hardware store and asked if there was any work he could help with. It felt strange coming from him, a man used to giving orders, not taking them. He was handed a broom and asked to sweep the sidewalk. It was a small task, but Ethan did it with a quiet focus, feeling the weight of humility. Days passed like this. He stayed in a modest room above the bakery and helped where he could. One day, while Audrey was sitting in the park reading, one of the girls tripped and fell near where he was walking. Instinctively, he ran over, kneeling beside her before he could think. He spoke to her softly and handed her a small handkerchief. When the girl looked up at him, mimicked. Her large blue eyes filled with tears. He felt his heart twist. "Thank you," she whispered shyly, clutching his hand for a moment before Audrey rushed over. Audrey froze, seeing them. "It's okay," he said quickly, stepping back. That afternoon, Audrey found him sitting near the beach. "Why are you still here, Ethan?" she asked softly. "Because I can't leave again," he said. "I thought I could once. I was wrong." "You think showing up and sweeping sidewalks makes up for abandoning us?" "No, nothing can make up for it. I know that. But I want to do some good, however small. Even if you never forgive me." Her eyes welled up. "You hurt me more than anyone could," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "You didn't just leave me. You made me feel like our love meant nothing." "It wasn't nothing," he whispered. "It was everything. I was just too proud to admit it." She stood up. "You should go, Ethan," she said quietly, but her voice lacked the certainty it had before. He stayed. Every day, he found new ways to be near without intruding. He fixed a broken fence outside their cottage. He left coffee on her porch. Sometimes he caught her watching him from the window. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it wasn't rejection either. Interactive question. Do you think Ethan's quiet, humble actions are sufficient proof that he has changed, or should Audrey demand more to regain her trust? Share your honest opinion in the comments. Part 5. The New Foundation. Months passed. One afternoon, a storm blew in unexpectedly. Audrey was walking with the girls when the wind picked up violently, and Ethan pulled his old pickup truck to a stop. He opened the passenger door without a word, and she hesitated, her hair soaked. Finally, she sighed and told the girls to climb in. The wall between them began to crack. Ethan fixed her fence, not because she asked, but because he noticed. One evening, as the sun was setting, Audrey showed up, sitting beside him on the cliff, keeping a wary distance. "You're still here," she said, her voice more curious than cold. "I told you I wouldn't leave," she exhaled softly. "They think you're just a nice man from town." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's enough for now." For the first time in years, they talked, truly talked. He told her about his hollow victories, how the silence of success was louder than any applause. She told him about the nights of crying and learning how to be strong. She stood up. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Ethan." "I don't expect you to," he replied, his voice firm but raw. "I just want to earn the chance." Meaningful conclusion. The sea and the second chance. Months later, the rhythm of their lives began to intertwine. Ethan taught the girls how to skip stones and read them stories. Audrey found herself smiling more often. One summer evening, as the family walked the beach, the girls running ahead, Audrey and Ethan walked behind, the wind playing in their hair. He turned to her, his voice low and full of awe. "Do you ever think we got a second chance?" She looked at him, her eyes soft and peaceful. "No," she said. "I think we built a new one." He smiled, reaching out his hand, and for the first time in years, She took it. Together, they stood watching the girls draw shapes in the sand, their footprints overlaying on the wet ground. For the first time since he walked out that door years ago, Ethan felt whole. The man who once believed love made him weak, you now understood. It was the only thing that had made him strong. The sea roared softly beside them, washing away the last pieces of who they had been, leaving only who they were now. A family, imperfect, but finally whole, standing at the edge of a new beginning. Final call to action. The story of Ethan and Audrey teaches us that true regret is not measured in words, but in the humble perseverance of actions. Audrey's strength didn't just save her. It guided her arrogant ex-partner back to the one place where success mattered, the heart of his family. What final piece of advice would you give Audrey to ensure Ethan stays on the path of redemption? Share your thoughts and advice in the comments section. If you loved this powerful transformation story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe until the next story. Part 6. Rebuilding the Trust. Welcome back. If you thought the peace on the beach was the end, you were wrong. Ethan Vance's real challenge starts now. Can a man who had everything survive in a world where he has nothing but love? If you believe Ethan is making the right choice, like and subscribe to support him on this new life. The echo of the city. While Ethan built a new life on the coast of Maine, back in Manhattan, news of his disappearance had created a small earthquake. Vance Global Architects continued to run, but without Ethan's cold, precise hand, things grew chaotic. The board tried to keep it quiet, but rumors spread. Ethan Vance, the Midas of design, had abandoned his empire for a mystery. In the first few weeks, Ethan received hundreds of urgent calls and emails. He kept his old phone off in a drawer, like a relic of the man he was. However, he couldn't cut off completely. He needed to transfer power. One morning, he drove to a large nearby city and called Raoul, his most trusted assistant. Raoul arrived, his face etched with worry. "Mr. Vance, please, you have to come back. The board is on the verge of panic. We've lost 3 key contracts this week. Your mother is demanding to know where you are." Ethan poured Raoul a black coffee. "Raoul, I need you to listen closely. I'm not coming back. I found something more important than Vance Global. Something more important than $1 billion in assets?" Raoul stammered. Ethan smiled, a genuine smile. "Yes, Raoul. 3 things, in fact, and they're worth more than everything I've built." He spent the day establishing a complex transfer plan. He didn't sell the company, but transferred the directorship to a trust with the condition that a large portion of the annual profits be invested in community projects in the rural Maine region. Interactive question. Do you think Ethan's use of Vance Global to invest in the local community is a genuine act of redemption, or just a way to indirectly control Audrey's new life? Comment your opinion. Audrey's small triumphs. While Ethan dealt with the ghost of his empire, Audrey's life was filled with small victories. Her house lacked luxury, but it was flooded with laughter. Liv, Grace, and June grew used to the nice man who helped their mother. Ethan became an indispensable part of their routines, helping with drawings, repairing toys, and telling stories of great architects. One evening, Grace, the most lively, asked, "Mr. Ethan, why don't you have your shiny, fast car anymore?" Ethan looked at Audrey. He had sold his expensive sports car for an old pickup truck. "Because the most important things in life are slow," Ethan replied. "Like building a sandcastle. If you do it fast, it falls down. If you do it slow and carefully, it lasts a long time. My old, slow car allows me to see the important things better." Audrey, who was washing dishes, paused for a moment. She knew he wasn't just talking to his daughter. He was talking to himself. When the girls were tucked into bed, Audrey and Ethan sat on the porch. "I spoke to Raoul," Ethan said. I transferred the company directorship to a trust. I set conditions for them to invest in the Maine community. Audrey looked at him. It's not for me. You didn't do it so I would forgive you. No, Ethan replied. I did it because I couldn't stand the noise anymore. The success of my former life deafened me. Now, I need to listen. Audrey turned to look at the sea, then said, The sea doesn't forgive you, Ethan. The sea is just there. You have to learn to coexist with it. For Ethan, that was the greatest acceptance he had received. She hadn't forgiven him, but she had given him the chance to coexist. Part 2. The architecture of atonement. The shock continues. Ethan's new life is threatened when the past comes looking for him, not to claim money, but to claim the honor of the Vance lineage. Share and subscribe to see how Ethan protects his new family. The icy visit. The peace didn't last. One afternoon, a gleaming black limousine, rare even for Manhattan, pulled up on the dirt road leading to Audrey's small house. Out stepped Mrs. Eleanor Vance, Ethan's mother. She wore a designer suit and looked at the house with undisguised disgust. Ethan was outside, fixing the girl's swing set. He saw his mother and immediately went on guard. Alexander, she said, deliberately using the name she used for high society, her voice ice cold. I've come to end this pathetic charade. My name is Ethan, Mother, and this is not a charade. It's my life. Mrs. Vance shot a look at Audrey, who had just come out, hugging a frightened June. I see this woman's ambition is greater than I thought. She didn't just steal your name. She forced you into a life of poverty for total control. Audrey stepped forward, facing Mrs. Vance unflinchingly. My name is Audrey, Mrs. Vance, and I didn't steal anything from your son. He threw it in my face, and I picked it up and multiplied it by 3. The poverty you see is the dignity your family never understood. I didn't come here to listen to sermons from the lower class, Mrs. Vance cut in, her voice like steel. I came for my grandson. Ethan stood beside Audrey. You don't have a grandson here, Mother. You have 3 granddaughters, and they have a mother, and you have no right to anything. It's madness, Mrs. Vance shouted, pointing at the girls. Triplets! Identical! Your lineage is at stake. You can't let Vance blood grow up in a hovel. I demand a DNA test. And if they are yours, I demand my legal right to a supervised relationship. The family will forgive you if you come back and give them the education they deserve. The final declaration. Ethan took a deep breath, looked at Audrey for a second, then turned back to his mother. His gaze was no longer one of fear. It was of unshakable protection. I will do the DNA test, not for you, but for them, so their father can never deny them anything again. And if the result is positive, Ethan said, his voice firm. He walked over to the limousine, took the key from the ignition, and threw it into the dirt road. You will not come here with your poison, Mother. This house is the only place where the Vance money doesn't exist, and that's how it will stay. If you want to see your grandchildren, you will come here, without a driver, without your jewels, and you will ask Audrey for permission. And if you ever try to use our past or my money to harm my family, I will use every last penny I have left to dismantle the very thing you care about, the reputation of Vance Global. Mrs. Vance looked at the key in the mud, then at her son's unyielding face. She knew that, in that instant, she had lost him forever. She turned with bitter defeat. When the limousine disappeared, Audrey turned to Ethan. She simply offered him her hand, and he took it, a firm grip, free of arrogance. The DNA confirmed what they already knew. Ethan tore up the paper. He didn't need scientific proof. He needed proof of love. Meaningful conclusion and part 8. Conclusion significant. The story of Ethan and Audrey teaches us that a man's greatest power does not lie in the size of his empire, but in the courage to protect what is simple and real. Ethan chose dignity over wealth, love over arrogance. His legacy will no longer be Vance Global, but the firm foundation he built with his own hands for his triplets. Now, after facing his mother, how do you think Ethan and Audrey's relationship will change? Will the trust be completely healed? Share your thoughts in the comments section. If you loved this powerful ending, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to support this story of love and redemption. Part 8. The Reconstruction of Trust. Welcome to the most delicate phase. After the dramatic confrontation, Ethan and Audrey must move from coexistence to commitment. But how do you rebuild trust with a man who broke it in the cruelest way? If you believe their love is worth the risk, drop a heart in the comments and subscribe to follow this redemption. The silence after the storm. The confrontation with Mrs. Eleanor Vance was brutal, but it served as the cement that, paradoxically, bound the foundation of Ethan's new life. By confronting his mother and destroying the key to her limousine, he physically cut the last umbilical cord to his past of luxury and arrogance. However, Ethan's courage did not erase Audrey's pain. That night, after the triplets were asleep, Audrey sat next to Ethan, watching the fire in the fireplace. The silence wasn't awkward. It was filled with the weight of unsaid words. "Thank you," she finally whispered, "for standing up for them like that, for facing her." "It's not enough," Ethan replied, his voice low and raw. "A good man never would have allowed you to have to defend them in the first place. I was a coward." Audrey nodded. "The DNA proved they are yours. But fatherhood isn't a blood test, Ethan. It's a presence test. And you missed 2 years of everything." "I know, and I regret it every day." Audrey stood up and walked to the window, watching the lighthouse blink in the dark. "It's not your regret I need. It's your integrity. The woman you were with, the one who believed in you, doesn't exist anymore. You have to convince this woman, the Audrey who built her world from scratch, that you deserve a place in it." Ethan understood. Redemption wasn't about grand gestures, like tearing down an empire, but about daily humility. Ethan's new job. Ethan didn't return to the hardware store. He knew his presence there was a mere symbolic act. He needed a job that was real, that used his mind and hands, but was in service, not in command. He used his architecture skills to find a small social construction company in the capital of Maine. He introduced himself not as Ethan Vance, the Midas, but as Ethan Soto, his maternal grandfather's surname, a technical architect looking for fieldwork. He hid his past and his remaining wealth. His first task was supervising the remodel of a community center for the elderly. The work was hard, the hours long, and the pay modest. For the first time, his hands got dirty, not with $500 pen ink, but with cement, dust, and sweat. He learned more in a month with the construction workers than in a decade on the board of directors. It wasn't about profit. It was about quality and usefulness. When an elderly man thanked him for fixing a ramp that kept him from going outside, he felt a satisfaction no multi-million-dollar contract had ever given him. He returned home late, smelling of earth and hard work. The girls didn't ask why his clothes were stained. They laughed and hugged him. To them, he was the strong papa who could fix anything. The Garden of Patience. Audrey watched the change with a mixture of caution and growing respect. Ethan didn't ask to spend more time with them. He earned it. One afternoon, while the girls were playing, Audrey noticed her small yard was neglected. "Ethan," she said, "that garden needs a miracle. I tried, but with 3 girls, it's impossible to maintain." He looked at the garden, full of weeds and dry soil. "It doesn't need a miracle, Audrey. It needs a sustainable design and a lot of patience." That became their silent project. For the next few weeks, Ethan, the man who designed skyscrapers in Manhattan, dedicated his free afternoons to that small garden. He built a rudimentary irrigation system, designed a small stone path with recycled materials, and planted flowers resistant to the coastal climate. He did it without asking for help, without seeking recognition. Audrey watched him from the kitchen, holding a cup of tea, and realized the metaphor. He was rebuilding the foundation of their lives in the same way, slowly, with dedication, and without shortcuts. One Saturday, as the triplets helped him plant lavender, Liv, the most thoughtful, approached him. "Daddy, why didn't you come before?" The question, simple and direct, struck him. Ethan wiped the mud from his hands and picked her up. "My love, your daddy was lost in a very big city," he said, his voice soft. "I was so focused on building tall buildings that I forgot to build something important right here." He touched his chest. "But your mommy, she taught me where the real foundation is. I will never leave again." Liv nodded, satisfied. "Good. We want you to teach us how to build the greenhouse." Interactive. Question: if you were Audrey, what final act of humility or sacrifice from Ethan would be the ultimate proof that he deserves your trust again? Would it be the garden, the renunciation of Vance Global, or something else? We want to know your opinion. The proposal of a new beginning. Months later, the garden was flourishing. It wasn't luxurious, but it was a sanctuary. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, Audrey and Ethan sat on the porch, their feet up on the new stone wall he had built. "The construction company offered me a project manager position," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "In Boston. We'd have to move. It's a good job, but it's full-time." Audrey didn't react with fear. She saw the opportunity in his eyes, the realization of a real purpose. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Ethan turned to her, his blue eyes intense in the moonlight. He didn't pull out an engagement ring. He pulled out a crumpled piece of tracing paper, the same one she had given him years ago with the design of her first dream project. "I want to build the house we designed together, Audrey. Not for the magazine, but for us. With a strong foundation right here in Maine. I want our own construction company, focused on social projects, where I'm the architect, and you are my partner. I want to start from scratch with you. No Vance money, just the work of my hands. Would you agree to rebuild my life with me as my partner in every sense?" Audrey looked at the crumpled blueprint. She saw the man who had left and the man who had returned. She saw the humility in his proposal. She reached out her hand, not to take the proposal, but to gently touch his cheek. "Yes, Ethan. Let's build something truly worthwhile, but on one condition." "Anything," he whispered. "Our business will be called Aranda Vance Design, because this time the foundation is mine." Ethan smiled, a warm glow in his eyes. "It's the strongest foundation I've ever known." They kissed, and the kiss wasn't the urgency of the past, but the promise of a future cemented in truth, hard work, and the unyielding love that had survived an empire. Final conclusion and call to action. Meaningful conclusion. Ethan Vance learned that true greatness is not in the power you control, but in the humility with which you kneel to build a future. Audrey taught him that love is not bought or demanded. It is earned with the patience of a gardener and the integrity of a builder. They didn't get a second chance. They built one, brick by brick, upon the ruins of arrogance. Comment if you think the Aranda Vance Design Construction Company will succeed and why. Like, share this inspiring story, and subscribe for more tales of redemption.